Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to pickleball improvement, specifically your pickleball mind. I am your host, Tony Roig. It's a pleasure to be with you this week. This week we're going to have a three-parter, so buckle up and get ready. We got three subjects we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about assigning fault. The word fault is a loaded term. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to deal with that because all of us deal with that idea, right? That it's our fault, your fault, whatever. Then we're going to talk about the increasing our empathy, evolutionary empathy. I think you're going to like that. It's kind of something I've been playing with in my mind, and I think it's going to help you out. And then lastly, we're going to talk about staying focused, this 5 kilometer at a time world record behind me if you're watching me on the YouTube channels, on the videos. My name is Tony Roig. I am your host of this weekly podcast. I have to make a note for myself because I forget to introduce myself at the beginning of the podcast. It's just not natural for me, but anyway, that is my name, and happy to be with you here. I am a master teaching pickleball professional. I've been doing this full-time for about 4 years now, this pickleball coaching, and before that for about 2 years part-time, and it's what I do. It's full-time thinking about pickleball, working on pickleball. I'm getting to coach some pro pickleball now, so just everything pickleball all the time, including this podcast, to help you out. Let me do a couple of housekeeping, and then we'll jump into Not Dakota's Fault, which I think you'll find hopefully a helpful story for you as well. First, we have our therapist event coming up on September 18th. So if you're a therapist, please mark your calendar. It's 4 to 5 p.m. It'll be a live recording of the podcast where you can come in and ask some questions, and we'll have some conversation, and it should be a lot of fun. If you're not a therapist but want to be one, send us an email at support@betterpickleball.com with the subject line therapist. If you and even if you're not a therapist, you can still listen to the event live and or record it. So check that out. Want to let you know that our system class is enrolling at the end of September. So if you've been thinking about the pickleball system, end of September will be an opportunity to join our September class. It only happens a couple times a year, the enrollment, because it is a class. So if that's something of interest to you, put that on your calendar. And we have a 3-day online workshop going on September 23rd. So if you want to learn more from CJ and me about this awesome sport of pickleball and maybe a different way of thinking about it, join us for that event. Put it on your calendar. If you're on email list, you'll get invited to it as well, but just so you're on the alert. I want to do a shout out here, actually 2 shout outs. First, Chris, thank you very much for sending me the feedback on the Apple podcast. It's about the name of the podcast, and what you say makes sense. And what Chris says is that, the name therapy may be off-putting to some, and I could see that. I can certainly see that, and I appreciate the feedback on it. I'd have to think about pivoting away from the name now, but I certainly appreciate the perspective of that. I hadn't thought about that before, it being potentially off-putting. If you have a thought on that, let us know in the comments, or you can send us an email as well. That one you can send to therapy@betterpickleball.com if you have a thought about the name of the podcast. The shout out I wanted to share here is from Hunt AMAFW on June 30th on Apple podcast reviews. And I think this is telling, right? Because it is a part of the game that I think most players don't really fully appreciate the importance of. So it says, got us over the hump. We did not realize how important the mental game was until we started listening to your podcasts. We incorporated many of your ideas into our practice and games, and it has made a big, capital big, difference. During stressful matches, we will tell each other a key podcast thought, and that immediately recenters us back to a good place. Our play has improved, and we believe your podcast was a significant reason. Thank you. It's our pleasure, my pleasure, and our pleasure to bring you these podcasts. And I think that's the power of, that's why at the end of the podcast we say, share it with your friends, because it's, it can be so powerful hopefully for you and also for those you know. So appreciate you sharing your story with us. All right, it's a 3-parter, but each part will be fairly succinct, I think. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is assigning fault. And up here it says not Dakota's fault. And the reason for that is I got to play this Saturday in a mixed group. Our friend Tyson over at Hillsborough Community College puts together a group, different groups sometimes. And there's sometimes it's older players, younger players, kind of a mixed thing. So Dakota's a younger player, both in terms of her time in pickleball and also just a younger person, younger human being. And she and I were paired up in our first, the first match of the day was Dakota and I playing against TC and Kyler. And it was a good match. And And normally I don't really, I don't get bogged down in things like whose fault was this, right? Like in terms of winning or losing. It was a tight match. We ended up on the losing end of it. But it was interesting because I was saying to Dakota how well she was playing, because I had seen her play probably 2 months before, and she didn't really understand pickleball. She knew how to hit tennis balls, but not pickleballs. And now she's playing pickleball, and so I complimented her on a few of her shots. And then I also wanted to let her know that because we still live in a results-oriented mindset, right? As a society, myself included, sometimes we still live in the results thing. And so I let her know. I said basically that between, like, basically that game was on me, right? And what was interesting was Dakota responded by saying, "No, I didn't play well," which objectively, and I told her this, as a coach, as an objective observer of the game, I can tell you that Dakota played very well. Did she do everything perfectly? No, because that's silly, right? No, who does everything perfectly? But she played very well that match. If there was a player on the team who did not play well, it was me. I was pressing, meaning I was pushing areas that didn't make sense, right? Trying to create where there was nothing to create from. TC and Kyler played a really nice match, so basically, fault isn't really the thing I don't want it to focus on here. The idea that we should assign fault, but I do think that it's often we jump to we did something wrong, whether it's in a rally, whether it's in a game, and I think that's something we need to be careful about. Always thinking that it was us that was the problem, right? Us who did something that we should have done better. Anyway, just think of that when you're playing, right? And again, it's not a matter of like going out there with this idea that I need to assign fault, but if you slide into that, right, where you're, I think it's instinctive, right? We're instinctual, where we just sit there and go like, that must have been on me, right? I made a mistake. One example I'll give you that's very common is, ball gets slammed, and the player who gets slammed with the ball can't react to it, right? Because it's a slam. And usually that player who got slammed is like, oh, I should have had my paddle ready and things like that. Not the issue. The issue is the shot before. It could be shot 3 shots before, like a short return to serve that set up the whole thing sequence. So be careful with the fault idea. And Dakota, when your fault. Not to say it was anybody's fault, but it certainly wasn't your fault. All right. Let's move into the second topic, which is this concept of evolutionary empathy. And this is something I'm still playing around with. It's new to me. But I'll give you the general gist of it, and then I'll tell you how to apply it to pickleball. So the idea is that prior to, I'm going to get a little deep here for a second, so allow me. Prior to us as Homo sapiens, right? That's what we are. There was a species called Homo heidelbergensis, or I think it's got to be heidelbergensis because it comes from a fossil they found in Heidelberg, Germany. So it's heidelbergensis, I guess, is our predecessor. So Heidelbergensis and Homo heidelbergensis and Homo sapiens, overlapped for about 100,000 years. The reason I tell you this is because evolution, right, doesn't happen instantaneously, right? It's not like there's a light switch and all of a sudden everybody's like, something else. I also think it'd be pretty arrogant of us to think that we are the final step in this evolutionary thing. And so, assuming that we are in an evolutionary world, right, a world that evolves, right, or not assuming that we are in an evolutionary world, a world that evolves, understanding that we are always in an evolutionary phase, right? There are humans who are in different places along the evolutionary scale, right? And I think about it in terms of like iPhones, right? So you have iPhone 6, iPhone 7, iPhone 8. I think we're up to iPhone 15 now. And that's natural, right? There's nothing, like an iPhone 11 is still a fine iPhone. It's just an iPhone 11. And so when you're on the court, right, and this is where the empathy comes in. When you're on the court and say you have a disagreement with somebody else, right, and they just see the world from a different vantage point than you, consider the fact that maybe you guys are speaking past each other a little bit because the fact that you're different versions of humans, right? So basically it allows you to be more empathetic because you can just say, okay, maybe I'm an iPhone 7 and they're an iPhone 8, or they're an iPhone 7 and I'm an iPhone 8, whatever you like better. But the idea is that it's not that you're doing anything that's intentionally bad or intentionally wrong. You're just operating within your operating module, and they're operating with their operating module. And each of us, right, regardless of whether you're an iPhone 7, 8, 9, 6, doesn't matter. All of us are entitled to our opinions and our ability to navigate the world. We don't have a right to negatively impact others, right? I'm not suggesting that. But we do have a right to exist in our space, right? As our space and time on this planet, right, is ours. And so perhaps that'll help you think about it a little bit differently when you're disagreeing with someone, whether it's on the pickleball court or not on the pickleball court. The fact that maybe, you're just not in the same place as they are. And I'm not trying to say that you're better than them or they're better than you. That's not the point. It's that you're just in a different place on this evolutionary process that we're on. So it's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it, I think. So I'll offer that to you. And then the last area I want to cover today has to do with staying focused, right? Staying in the moment, staying in bite-sized pieces. And it's a story that I'll share with you that happened fairly recently. I don't know exactly where it happened, but it was a story that I saw about a para-athlete, visually impaired athlete who set the world record for the marathon. Now, the curious thing is this athlete did not go out intending to set the world record or even intending to run a marathon. What this athlete was doing was running in 5-kilometer segments to pace other runners on the like teammates, basically, right? So pacing them on 5-kilometer runs, and the runner had run 3 laps, right? There were 3 5-kilometer segments, and then felt fine, so ran another 3, and then ran a couple more, whatever. Kept running a little bit more at a time, right? And then they were almost done with what was a marathon, and they took a break to go talk to their coach because they didn't want the coach to be upset that they were running this much. So this runner went to go talk to the coach, actually sat down, right, and talking to the coach for like 30 seconds about it. And the coach said, well, if you jogged the next 5 kilometers, you'd have a world record marathon time, so go ahead. So the runner went out and didn't jog, but ran the next 5 kilometers and set the world record, right, in Paralympic, or I think it's Paralympic marathoning or para-athlete marathoning. But the point of it is this, right? That runner was not trying to run a marathon. That runner wasn't trying to set a world record, right? And that's sometimes I think the problem we run into when we play pickleball is that we're looking at the end, right? We go out there, we're like, we got to win this game, or I want to have a winning day, or things like that. That's not doable. And frankly, if you start thinking about it, it's just gonna distract you from like what you can actually control. And so the player, so do what this athlete did, this runner did, which is focus on control the controllables, right? Focus on what you can actually do. So focus on the next rally, right? Focus on the next serve, the next returner serve, and you can start by just focusing on one shot at a time, as I just mentioned. So you're basically like, if you're serving, that's the whole thing. That's your 5 kilometers, right? I just got to get the serve in and deep. The rest of it is fine. If I'm returning serve, I'm returning serve in and deep to my target. If you're a system member, you know where that is. But basically, I have my target, and I'm just going to go there, right? And as long as I do that, everything else will work out. And then once you get better at it, right, then you can keep layering next shot, and that's how you build a wonderful pickleball game, 5 kilometers at a time. All right, so that's this week's podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, we have our system and system coming up, workshop coming up. So if you want to learn more from us about this awesome sport in a way that will actually change your game, we're happy to do that for you. And as always, consider rating and reviewing the podcast. It helps us reach other players. And lastly, as always, share it with your friends. Remember, if you enjoyed the podcast, they probably will too. And if you bring it to them, they won't be worried about the word therapy, I don't think. But just kidding, Chris. Appreciate you giving me the feedback on it. Have a great week, and I'll see you at the next episode of Pickleball Therapy. Be well.